we are witnessing what many thought was impossible: a Ukrainian strike hitting a Moscow airport at peak hour. This is not just another battlefield update, this is a warning, a message, and a turning point in the Russian Ukraine war. Reports emerging during the Christmas period indicate that Ukraine allegedly carried out a strike targeting a Moscow airport at peak travel hours, an incident that immediately drew global attention due to both its location and timing. While official details remain limited and claims are still being assessed, the mere suggestion that a Ukrainian attack reached one of Russia's most sensitive transportation hubs marks a significant moment in the conflict. Moscow's airports are not only civilian gateways but also critical logistical arteries handling government travel, military movement, and international traffic. An incident at such a location, particularly during one of the busiest travel periods of the year, instantly elevates the strategic and psychological weight of the event. The timing alone transformed the alleged strike into a powerful statement. Peak Christmas travel hours mean thousands of civilians in transit, heightened security presence, and intense media visibility. Any disruption during this window multiplies the sense of vulnerability not just among travelers but across the entire population watching events unfold in real time. For years, Russian authorities have emphasized that the war would not affect daily life in major cities, especially in Moscow. A reported attack during a holiday rush directly challenges that narrative and forces uncomfortable questions about how insulated the capital truly is from the conflict. What makes this incident particularly compelling is the symbolic breach it represents. Moscow has long been portrayed as the safest space in the country, heavily defended and far removed from frontline realities. An alleged Ukrainian strike reaching an airport in the capital suggests either a gap in defensive systems or a calculated risk taken by the attackers to demonstrate reach rather than raw destruction. The message, intentional or not, resonates far beyond physical damage. If a capital's airport can be disrupted during a peak hour, then no location can be considered entirely beyond the war's reach. That realization alone can be more destabilizing than any explosion. The human dimension of the event cannot be overlooked. Airports are emotional spaces, especially during holidays filled with families, returning workers, and anxious travelers. Reports of alarms, delays, and emergency responses create an atmosphere of fear that lingers long after operations resume. In modern conflicts, shaping public perception is nearly as important as territorial gains. An incident like this generates images and stories that spread rapidly, undermining confidence and amplifying uncertainty. Even without extensive physical damage, the psychological impact can be profound. Internationally, the alleged strike sends a clear signal that the conflict is evolving. Observers note that the war is no longer confined to distant battlefields, but is increasingly intersecting with civilian infrastructure and daily life. This raises urgent concerns about escalation and retaliation, especially when high profile locations are involved. Allies, adversaries, and neutral states alike are closely watching how Moscow responds, aware that every reaction sets a precedent for what may follow. Perhaps the most striking aspect of this incident is how it redefines expectations. The idea that a Christmas travel rush in Moscow could be disrupted by war related activity would have seemed unthinkable at the start of the conflict. Now, it is part of the conversation. That shift alone illustrates how the war continues to rewrite assumptions, forcing both sides and the world to confront a reality in which distance and symbolism no longer guarantee safety. The timing of the reported strike plays a critical role in understanding its broader significance, as actions taken during peak periods are rarely accidental in modern warfare. Christmas travel hours represent one of the most sensitive windows in the calendar when airports operate at maximum capacity and public tension is heightened. Any disruption during such a moment instantly magnifies impact, turning a single incident into a nationwide talking point. If the objective was visibility rather than sheer destruction, choosing this timing ensured that the message could not be ignored. When people expect calm and celebration, shock carries more weight, and that contrast becomes a powerful tool. Peak travel hours are also when infrastructure is under the greatest strain, which means even limited interference can create cascading effects. Delays ripple across regions, security responses escalate, and information spreads rapidly through social media and news outlets. In this environment, uncertainty becomes as disruptive as physical damage. Travelers share videos, rumors circulate, and official statements struggle to keep pace with public reaction. This is where timing becomes a force multiplier. An incident that might have remained localized at another hour transforms into a national moment simply because it occurred when millions were watching, traveling, or waiting. The psychological dimension of this timing cannot be overstated. Holidays carry expectations of safety and continuity, particularly in capital cities that symbolize stability and control. A reported strike during Christmas challenges that sense of normalcy at its core. It sends a subtle but unsettling message. There are no pauses in this war, no protected moments, no guaranteed calm. That realization has a deeper emotional impact than an attack carried out during routine hours. When fear intrudes on a holiday, it lingers longer, embedding itself in memory rather than fading into statistics. From a strategic perspective, peak hour timing also complicates security and response mechanisms. Airports during high traffic periods involve layered coordination between civilian authorities, security services, and emergency responders. Any sudden incident forces rapid decisions under pressure, increasing the likelihood of visible disruption. Flights grounded, terminals evacuated, and heightened checks all become part of the public experience. These scenes, even if precautionary, project vulnerability. For observers inside and outside the country, the images matter almost as much as the facts. They suggest stress within systems designed to project control. There is also a signaling effect directed beyond domestic audiences. Internationally, a peak hour incident during a major holiday commands attention from governments, analysts, and media organizations worldwide. It ensures that the event dominates news cycles, pushing the conflict back into global focus. In an era where wars compete with countless crises for attention, timing becomes a strategic choice. A carefully chosen moment can revive urgency, influence diplomatic discussions, and reshape perceptions about the conflict's trajectory. Perhaps the most unsettling implication of this timing is what it suggests about escalation. Choosing a moment of maximum civilian presence raises concerns about how boundaries are shifting in the conflict. Even if the intent was not to target civilians, the willingness to act during such a window reflects a hardening of strategy where psychological pressure is openly leveraged. It forces policymakers and the public alike to confront a sobering reality as the war drags on. Moments once considered untouchable are increasingly drawn into its shadow, and the clock itself becomes a weapon. The reported incident has sharply challenged Moscow's long standing claim of being shielded by an impenetrable security and air defense system, a narrative carefully built and repeatedly reinforced since the start of the war. For years, Russian officials and state media have emphasized that while fighting raged elsewhere, the capital remained untouchable, protected by layered defenses and constant surveillance. That image has now been placed under intense scrutiny. Even the suggestion that an attack could reach a Moscow airport forces a reassessment of how effective those defenses truly are, and more importantly, how confident the public can remain in the assurances they have been given. Security in a capital city is not just about physical systems, it is about perception. Moscow represents political power, military command, and national pride. When questions arise about its protection, those doubts spread far beyond a single location. If an airport, one of the most closely monitored civilian sites, can be disrupted, observers naturally ask what this implies for other critical infrastructure. Are command centers as secure as claimed? Are transportation networks fully protected? Once these questions enter public consciousness, they are difficult to contain, and official silence or vague explanations often deepen suspicion rather than calm it. The challenge becomes even more significant when viewed through the lens of deterrence. Russia's security narrative has long relied on projecting strength and control, discouraging adversaries by suggesting that any attempt to strike deep inside the country would be futile or catastrophic. An incident that appears to bypass or strain these defenses weakens that deterrent image. It introduces uncertainty on both sides of the conflict. For Ukraine and its supporters, it signals potential reach. For Russian citizens, it introduces doubt. And in modern warfare, doubt can be as destabilizing as physical damage. Another critical aspect is the strain such incidents place on institutions responsible for internal security. Air defense systems, intelligence agencies, and emergency services are designed not only to prevent attacks, but also to reassure the population. When they are perceived to falter, even temporarily, pressure mounts behind closed doors. Investigations are launched, responsibilities questioned, and internal confidence tested. These internal dynamics rarely make headlines, but they can influence decision making at the highest levels, especially when public trust is at stake. The media environment amplifies this effect. In an age of instant communication, unofficial footage, eyewitness accounts, and speculation often spread faster than verified information. Each clip or post fuels debate about what went wrong and whether authorities are being fully transparent. Efforts to downplay or tightly control the narrative can backfire, creating a sense that something is being hidden. The more officials insist that everything remains under control, the more audiences may ask why such reassurances are necessary in the first place. Perhaps the most powerful hook in this moment is the shift in expectations it creates. For much of the war, the idea that Moscow's core infrastructure could be directly affected seemed remote. Now, that assumption no longer holds with the same certainty. The question is no longer whether Moscow is protected, but how long that protection can be guaranteed. That shift, subtle yet profound, alters the psychological landscape of the conflict, reminding everyone that even the strongest defenses are tested not only by force, but by the fear of their limits being exposed. The incident points toward a broader strategic shift in how pressure is being applied in the conflict, moving beyond traditional frontline engagements and into the realm of core infrastructure and symbolic targets. For much of the war, fighting has been defined by territorial advances, trench warfare, and clashes along well known battle lines. A reported strike affecting a major transportation hub inside the Russian capital suggests a recalibration of priorities, where the objective extends beyond holding ground to shaping perception, disrupting systems, and forcing the conflict into spaces previously considered off limits. That shift alone signals a new phase with far reaching implications. Targeting infrastructure, even indirectly, changes the rhythm of war. Frontlines move slowly and often feel distant to civilians living far from combat zones. Infrastructure disruptions, however, are immediate and personal. Airports, railways, and logistics centers connect daily life to the state's ability to function. When these nodes are threatened, the impact travels faster than any military column. Flights are delayed, schedules collapse, and uncertainty seeps into routines. The hook here is simple but powerful. When war touches systems people rely on every day, it stops being abstract and becomes unavoidable. This approach also reflects an understanding that modern conflicts are fought as much in the psychological and economic domains as on the battlefield. Disrupting infrastructure sends a message about capability and intent without necessarily engaging in large scale conventional clashes. It tests response times, exposes vulnerabilities, and forces the defending side to divert resources inward. Every additional layer of security around airports and transport hubs is a layer not deployed elsewhere. That redistribution of focus can quietly reshape the strategic balance without a single front line moving an inch. Another dimension of this shift lies in signaling endurance. Infrastructure focused pressure suggests a long game strategy, one that aims to gradually wear down confidence rather than achieve a single decisive victory. The implication is unsettling. If such targets can be reached once, they can be threatened again. This creates a persistent sense of anticipation where the absence of an attack no longer equates to safety. The fear of disruption becomes a constant background noise, influencing public mood and policy discussions alike. There is also a calculated ambiguity embedded in this strategy. Unlike clear battlefield engagements, infrastructure incidents often exist in a gray zone of attribution, intent, and scale. Was the target symbolic, logistical, or purely psychological? That ambiguity complicates diplomatic responses and media narratives. It forces analysts and officials to debate not just what happened, but what it means. In that space of uncertainty, pressure builds. Governments must respond decisively without overreacting, a balance that is notoriously difficult to maintain under public scrutiny. Perhaps the most striking hook is how this shift redraws the map of the war in people's minds. When pressure moves from distant regions to the heart of national infrastructure, the perceived geography of conflict collapses. Distance no longer offers reassurance. The war feels closer, more unpredictable, and more deeply intertwined with everyday life. This transformation does not require mass destruction to be effective. It relies on the constant reminder that systems once assumed to be secure are now part of the battlefield. In that sense, the strategic shift is not only about where the war is fought, but about how it is felt. The alleged strike at a major Moscow airport during a high traffic holiday period carries profound implications for public perception and political stability within Russia, highlighting how vulnerability in critical infrastructure can ripple far beyond immediate operational consequences. When an event like this occurs, it does more than temporarily disrupt travel schedules or security protocols. It challenges the very narrative that authorities have carefully constructed about control, protection, and national resilience. For a government that has repeatedly emphasized stability and the untouchability of its capital, such an incident threatens to erode trust and introduce uncertainty at every level of society. Public reaction in these circumstances is shaped as much by perception as by facts. The idea that a strike could reach the heart of the capital during a busy holiday moment generates anxiety, speculation, and a sense of insecurity that is difficult to contain. Citizens may question whether other critical systems, such as energy grids, government offices, or communication networks, are similarly vulnerable. Each unanswered question becomes a seed for doubt, and doubt, once sown, tends to grow exponentially in environments where information is tightly controlled. The very perception of vulnerability can be as destabilizing as actual physical damage. State media and official communications play a crucial role in this dynamic, but controlling the narrative in an era of instant reporting and social media is increasingly challenging. Eyewitness accounts, viral videos, and unofficial updates circulate faster than official statements, often framing the incident in ways that amplify fear and uncertainty. Even careful messaging from authorities can be undermined by images of evacuated terminals, grounded flights, or emergency responders in action. The hook lies in the fact that visibility magnifies impact. An incident that might have been a technical or isolated security breach now becomes a public event with national significance. Politically, the ramifications are equally substantial. Leadership legitimacy is often tied to perceptions of competence and the ability to maintain order. When security in a high profile location is called into question, it provides critics, both domestic and international, with ammunition. Questions about preparedness, response, and accountability can surface quickly, forcing policymakers to react under pressure. Each reactive measure is scrutinized, and any misstep, real or perceived, can deepen public skepticism. The psychological effect on decision makers is equally important. Repeated exposure to vulnerabilities can alter strategic calculations, create internal tension, and influence the pace or nature of military and political actions. The broader societal impact is amplified by timing and symbolism. Holidays are meant to represent safety, stability, and continuity, and when conflict intrudes during these periods, it disrupts not only daily routines but also emotional and cultural expectations. Families traveling, employees commuting, and officials conducting essential operations suddenly face the unsettling reality that the war is not distant or contained. The hook here is that the emotional resonance of disruption often exceeds its physical consequences, making each incident a force multiplier in shaping public sentiment. International observers also take note of these dynamics, recognizing that internal confidence and political stability are as critical to national security as battlefield performance. A strike that shakes public trust in the capital's defenses signals potential vulnerabilities that may have strategic consequences beyond the immediate incident. For allies, adversaries alike, it becomes a measure of both resilience and fragility, influencing diplomacy, military planning, and perception on a global scale. The incident therefore resonates on multiple levels, demonstrating that in modern conflicts, the interplay between perception, politics, and infrastructure is as consequential as the physical impact itself. The reported incident at a major Moscow airport during peak holiday travel raises pressing concerns about potential escalation in the conflict, highlighting the increasingly blurred lines between frontline warfare and attacks on urban centers. Traditionally, the focus of the war has been on contested regions where military forces clash directly on the battlefield. An incident reaching the heart of Russia's capital suggests a dangerous evolution, one in which strategic operations extend into civilian infrastructure and highly visible public spaces. This shift is not merely symbolic, it demonstrates a willingness, or at least the perceived capability, to bring the war into areas once thought protected by geography, defenses, or social conventions. Escalation in this context carries multiple dimensions. The first is tactical. Striking a major urban hub disrupts critical transport, creates chaos, and forces the defending side to divert resources from other operations to focus on internal security. Every additional checkpoint, every heightened alert, and every emergency response draws attention and manpower away from the front lines, subtly shifting the strategic balance. The hook here is that escalation is not only measured in terms of destruction or casualties, but in the capacity to stretch resources, force rapid decisions, and unsettle confidence in previously secure systems. Psychological escalation is equally significant. Attacking a capital city, particularly during a period when civilians are most vulnerable and focused on holiday routines, injects fear directly into public consciousness. Airports, transportation hubs, and densely populated centers are more than mere logistics points. They are symbols of normalcy and daily life. Disruption in these spaces resonates beyond immediate operational consequences, creating an enduring sense of uncertainty. Citizens begin to question safety in locations long considered untouchable, and that doubt can influence public sentiment, trust in authorities, and willingness to comply with government directives. The hook is stark. The war becomes a presence in everyday life rather than a distant concern, changing how people perceive the conflict entirely. Another aspect of potential escalation lies in signaling to both domestic and international audiences. A strike that reaches a major urban center communicates capability, resolve, and a willingness to push boundaries. It signals that no location, however symbolic or heavily defended, is entirely immune. For global observers, this kind of escalation raises urgent questions about the trajectory of the conflict and the rules being applied, particularly with regard to civilian spaces. The tension between military necessity and political optics becomes critical as each action carries reputational consequences and risks provoking broader responses. The ambiguity inherent in escalation further complicates matters. Incidents in highly visible areas often leave room for debate over intent, scale, and attribution. Was the target military, logistical, or purely symbolic? That uncertainty creates pressure on leadership, media, and analysts to interpret events quickly, often without complete information. In this vacuum, speculation spreads, heightening perception of vulnerability and amplifying the perceived severity of the event. The hook is that ambiguity itself becomes a strategic lever, shaping reactions and influencing policy even before facts are fully confirmed. Finally, the broader implication of such escalation is the erosion of previously accepted boundaries in warfare. Cities, infrastructure, and civilian routines were once considered areas to be avoided or shielded. When these areas come under threat, it signals a recalibration of acceptable targets and methods with profound consequences for how the conflict is fought and experienced. The perception of escalating stakes, combined with the reality of vulnerability in high profile locations, fundamentally alters the strategic, psychological, and political landscape, forcing all parties to reassess risk and respond in ways that could accelerate the pace and intensity of hostilities. This was not just a strike, this was a statement written in fire. The Russian Ukraine war has entered a darker, more dangerous chapter, one where no city feels safe and no holiday brings peace. If you want to understand where this war is really heading, if you want truth beyond headlines and propaganda, stay with this channel. Because the world may look calm tonight, but history is moving fast and it's moving violently.